Is your ability to do IVF under threat? What is really going on with politics, reproductive rights, and advocacy these days? And most importantly, if fertility treatment is under threat, who is fighting to protect it for all of us? In this special two-part episode of Baby or Bust, I am interviewing Barbara Collura, the CEO and president of Resolve, the National Infertility Organization. We will review what's happening with reproductive rights and what we can all do to protect access to fertility care. Welcome to the Baby or Bust Fertility Podcast, the podcast with interviews and in-depth discussions on reproductive health, created to support anyone curious about infertility, miscarriage, and early pregnancy. I'm your host, Dr. Lora Shahine, a double board-certified OBGYN and reproductive endocrinologist and former fertility and IVF patient myself, helping to build families for almost 20 years and dedicated to supporting and educating you on your family-building journey. Since the overturn of the federal protection for access to abortion by the Supreme Court and the Dobbs decision in June 2022, IVF has been under threat. It was a subtle rumble and a discussion among people in the know, but turned into an absolute roar in February 2024 when a state Supreme Court decision stopped IVF in the state of Alabama for almost 3 weeks. If you saw any coverage of what happened in Alabama, you likely heard from Barbara Collura, or maybe even saw a photo of her in the front of the Alabama State Courthouse. As the head of the National Infertility Association, Barbara and her team at Resolve have been advocating to protect reproductive rights. This is part one of a two-part episode and the interview that I did with Barbara. In this episode, part one, we get to know Barbara and her incredibly important role as a reproductive rights advocate. I've heard Barbara speak and be interviewed many times over the past few years, but I've never heard her own story of infertility and how she actually became so involved in Resolve and eventually became the leader of this incredible advocacy group. And right now, we need Resolve more than ever. And I'm so excited in this part one to share a little bit more about this incredible advocate. Let's get to the show. Barb, I am so excited to have you here. Welcome to the show.
I am really honored to be here. I'm also a big fan of you and your work and your advocacy. And I feel like this is just going to be sitting down with a friend and chatting. And that's what I love to do.
Well, I appreciate that so much. I am fangirling right now. I admire you and everything that Resolve is doing, especially this year. And I'm really excited to talk about what an incredible role you guys are starting and have always taken in advocacy. But I'd like the listeners to understand a little bit more about you, Barb, and how you came into this role to leading Resolve.
Well, I had my own infertility journey. My husband and I, we were told that we needed to do IVF. And I live here in the Washington, D.C. area. And so we pursued medical treatment. And I won't go into all of the details of my treatment, but we did a few rounds and it did not work. And I was in my early 30s, so I should have had really great prognosis. And so I was really open about the fact that we were doing IVF. I don't know why, but I told everybody everywhere I was in my job and volunteer stuff. And then I had failure after failure after failure. And I hit a point where I just got really depressed. And so I wasn't really sure, what we were going to do. We took a little bit of a break and then I got pregnant. And it was ectopic. And I didn't know what that was. And it was emergency surgery and the whole 9 yards. And then I really, really got depressed. And my husband and close friends said you need to get some mental health counseling because you're depressed. And I found a mental health provider who specializes in infertility right here in Northern Virginia. And I started seeing her once a week. And I swear to you, like the first week I saw her, she was like, you need to go to Resolve's programs. You need to check out Resolve. Have you checked out Resolve? Like every week she'd be like, have you been to Resolve's website yet? What have you found out? And we had at the time, this is in the late 1990s, we had a lot of programming locally here in the DC area. And, we still do have support groups and that sort of thing. And so she really, really encouraged me to check out Resolve. And I did.
Mm.
And I had not found Resolve when I was going through treatment. And I started becoming a consumer of everything Resolve. And I started using all of its resources and everything that came out. I was like, oh my God, I got to read everything. And I started going to different programs that they were having. I started meeting people. I remember Dr. Shahine walking into a hotel ballroom where they had like a educational program going on, and they rented this room, and there were like 100 people in it. And I literally was like, are there 100 people that have infertility? Like, I
Wow.
was blown away. I was
Yep.
completely blown away that, like, are you kidding me? There's this many people that are going through that. Like, how dumb was I to even like think that? But I remember coming home and my husband was like, what happened? And I go, oh my God, I feel like I was transformed. So through Resolve and through the support I was getting through the mental health professional, we were able, after a lot of months, reach a decision to build our family through adoption, which we did. We did an international adoption. My
Mm.
son is now 23 years old.
Mm.
And I got to a really good place emotionally. And I was like, I'm a serial volunteer. So I raised my hand and I said to Resolve, I said, what can I do? How can I help? And I started getting really involved in providing those same educational programs and services here in the DC area. And I'm still such good friends with those women. There's like 8 of us
Mm.
who came in and out. We all built our families in different ways, but we all came to Resolve, just dear, dear friends. And then I became involved in some national volunteer roles for Resolve. And then in 2004, they moved their national headquarters from the Boston area to the Washington, D.C. area, primarily for public policy reasons. And I got a call from the CEO, it was a man, and he said, hey, can come on in, and I'd love to meet you. And he had heard about me through other volunteers and board members. And so he said, would you be interested in joining the staff managing our volunteers? And my husband laughed and he was like, okay, wait a minute. You're volunteering like, 30 hours a week for Resolve, and now they're going to pay you for 40 hours a week. I don't think this is a hard decision.
That's
And
great.
so that's how I started at Resolve. I have a master's in international affairs. I worked overseas, so this was not like professionally my lane, but I was so passionate about the organization. I loved being a volunteer. I loved our volunteers. And so I had that role for 3 years, and then that CEO left.
Mm.
And the board said, "Barb, would you
What are you
would
doing?
you like to be?" And I said, "Is this like an interim thing?" And they were like, "No." I mean, it was
Oh,
really, when I look back, it was very casual. It was like not how it would happen anytime now, but here I am 17 years later. I've been the president and CEO, and this year I will be at Resolve. Well, this year I'm at Resolve 20 years. So, and then I was a volunteer for 4 years before that, and then went through my own infertility journey. So I like to tell people, like, Resolve's been a part of my life for at least 24, 25 years.
yeah.
And so I'm so grateful for the organization. I'm really grateful for the people who came before me.
Hmm.
When you're in a nonprofit, I didn't start Resolve. I'm not going to be here forever. I'm just this moment in time, right? And then people will come after me. But the people who came before me, those volunteers in the DC area, the volunteers at the national level, those board members, I am so grateful for them because I got to build my family because they were there to provide Resolve in my community, right? And do everything that
Mm-hmm.
Resolve does. So it's not lost on me that there's a lot of people that came way before me, and the staff and the volunteers now that really paved the way.
Oh my gosh. Barb, first of all, call me Laura. Second of all, I just loved listening to you talk. I did not interrupt you because we are so fortunate. We, as an entire fertility community and basically anybody that cares about reproductive rights, is so fortunate that you have this role at this present time. So Resolve was founded in, 1974. I have been referring to Resolve support groups since I've been caring for people with fertility issues, so almost 20 years. And so for the longest time in my career, I thought of it just how you came to it, a support network. And we've had some Resolve leaders on the podcast and interviewed and sort of learned about that in that role. And then Resolve has also pivoted, like you said, towards advocacy and really fighting for more coverage, teaching people like, okay, you live in this state, this is what your coverage is. And if you want to advocate for more coverage and more access to fertility care, do this. So I've seen that amazing, you have National Infertility Awareness Week that is increasing awareness. You have the Advocacy Day that just happened to happen yesterday. You must be so exhausted. Thank you so much for being here. So those two roles are extremely important. But this year and in the past 2 years since the overturn of Roe v. Wade and the threat to IVF and all reproductive rights, Resolve has come forward and been a fierce advocate. And I'm so glad that the organization was there. You're so humble. You're so gracious to say, oh, I'm so thankful for the people before me. I will be the person to say, I'm so glad that you're in this role right now because we need Resolve and people like you now more than ever. So thank you for listening through that.
I'm a little freaked
But I
out
just,
that you said all of that. I mean, it is very humbling. Resolve is a lot of different people. I don't really like the focus when it's on me as a person, but I will say that there have been times, Rebecca Flick, Betsy Campbell, we have some staff that have been with the organization, more than 10 years. Rebecca's been there 19 years. And so we've been worked together, and it's thought to myself, my God, what if I had what if I had left like 3 years ago?
mm-hmm,
Or, what if one of those key staff had left? Where we are today, we needed all of that, not just experience, but relationships
mm-hmm,
and things that were happening. And I was able to like literally text somebody that I met, 3 or 4 years ago, and they were like calling me back. And I just pulled on every possible relationship I ever had. And I'm thinking to myself, thank God I've been here a little while, because I don't know what would happen if somebody was relatively new.
yeah,
And so, for me, I worry about that tenure of people. It's pretty common in nonprofits that you have people who are there a long time, and a lot of people look at that as a negative. And then there are times like what we've experienced with the Alabama Supreme Court ruling and so forth, where I'm very glad we had this seasoned, tenured staff
mm-hmm,
who could just literally, like, we could snap a finger and we got things done. And
yeah.
so,
You guys are all amazing.
yeah,
We'll get back to talking to Barbara in just a second, but I want to remind you just how important it is to review the show. I found this incredible review on Apple Podcasts recently. This is from Allison. It's titled, Love This Podcast. Thank you. I love that Dr. Shahine has so many amazing guests on her show that provide comprehensive perspectives on building a family and infertility. I learn something new from every episode. That's awesome. Thank you for being such a fertility warrior. So many women and men can continue to learn about fertility options and overall fertility health. Wow. Thank you, Allison, for that amazing review. It's so important for people to follow the show, rate the show, review it. It just helps other people find it, and it means so much to me. Now let's get back to talking to Barbara. So let's make sure the listeners understand, you and I are deep in this, but I want to make sure they
yeah.
kind of understand. There's still so many people in the country that don't understand what the overturn of Roe v. Wade, the Dobbs decision in June 2022, the pause of IVF in Alabama this year in February. A lot of people do not understand what abortion and reproductive rights and IVF have to do with each other. Can you just take us through a little bit and really teach the listeners why we as people who build families, really care about protecting reproductive rights? Because it's really hard for sometimes people to get that through line.
I will tell you, this is probably the most common question, and we cannot assume that people know what we're going through or what we're talking about. And it's really always important to remember that even people who've done IVF are like, I don't know what the big deal is. And we need to be very cognizant of the fact that this is really complicated and it's not intuitive why we even have these conversations or why we should even be part of these conversations. One of the things that started happening long before Roe v. Wade is in the abortion space is it's really, really important to define when life begins. And it is something that you often hear people talk about in different terminologies. They might use the word moment of conception or moment of fertilization. And why this is important is that if you are of the mindset that all life is precious and all life matters, which I don't know many people that wouldn't think that, but if you believe that there is a moment of conception, and from that moment, that's a living human being, that's a person, it's really important to figure out when is that? When does that start? Right? Because if I'm of a mindset that says that fertilized egg, that moment of conception, now it's a person, and my moral belief or my religious belief is that I'm going to do everything I can to protect that life. And this is where you get the term I'm pro life. You're going to protect that life. Knowing when that moment of when life begins is really, really, really important. So we started seeing something called personhood. And for me, I can look at 2008 as sort of the moment when I am sure it existed before that. But honestly, Laura, this was like a fringe pro life thought. It was not
Mm-hmm.
mainstream in 2008. It was very fringe. And it was a movement that said, you know what? A fertilized egg is a person.
Mm-hmm.
And we believe that that person has all the rights of a living human being. And that life should be protected at all costs. I don't think they knew a thing about IVF at the time. I'm absolutely convinced of that because there's no indication that they were trying to attack IVF or look at IVF. But as you know, we do know IVF.
Mm-hmm.
We know it very, very intimately. And we were like, a fertilized egg, moment of conception is a person. Well, gosh, that happens in a lab in a petri dish with sperm and egg. And we also learned that there isn't like a moment of conception. So that became the reality of science and a moral or religious belief trying to reconcile when life begins. And so what we learned through that process is that when we started talking to your colleagues, we started talking to reproductive endocrinologists, we started talking to embryologists, and we said, hey, let's walk this through. You're in the lab, fertilized egg, now it's a person, and there are laws in this state that say you can't kill a person, you can't do this to a person, you can't do that to a person. And this is where the science started saying, wait a minute, that, wow, if that fertilized egg in that petri dish that I'm now watching, if that's a person, I'm not sure of some things that we can do.
Mm-hmm.
Like, could we freeze that embryo? Could we ship it across state lines? What if we want to do some kind of genetic testing? What if something happens and that embryo stops growing in the petri dish? I don't
Is it
know
murder?
who
Yeah.
who quote unquote killed the person. So we became, I don't want to say knee deep, we became like neck deep in this and became really experts on it very early on. In fact, our board approved a personhood policy that we kept updating because new things would cross our minds. The good news is that because it was a fringe thought of the pro-life movement, it didn't really take hold and we didn't see a lot of action. But there were certainly pieces of legislation. There were these ballot initiatives where they would get on the ballots in states when voters went to the polls to vote in November.
Mm-hmm.
They would vote on this ballot measure, and in the ballot measure would be like 3 sentences, and it basically would say, we want to change our state constitution so that the word person means every stage of life from the moment of conception. Literally, like that was probably the exact wording of one of these ballot initiatives. We saw those ballot initiatives in Mississippi, North Dakota, and Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
None of them passed. But these were kind of test cases. I mean, who's going to North Dakota? No offense to my friends in North Dakota, but that was a test to see if they could get something like that passed. And these failed. And so we were still very, very concerned about this defining when life begins and that fertilized egg is a person. And we started talking about this a lot. And
Mm-hmm.
there's still debate, Laura, if there were attempts to do this to actually shut down IVF or if we were an unintended consequence. I'm a naive, optimistic person. I like to think that it was just an unintended consequence. But what we saw is every time we went into a state where we'd have one of these personhood legislative bills and we started talking to lawmakers, they were like, "What? I'm not like I don't want to prevent people from having babies. What are you talking about?" And that really worked. It really, really, really worked. In fact, one of
Mm-hmm.
our most favorite, if you can sit here and like let's tell stories. One of our most favorite stories is from 2012 where there was a bill in Virginia and Resolve is based in Virginia. I live in Virginia. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that the bill number was number 1
Hmm.
and it was a personhood bill. And it was, again,
Mm-hmm.
2 or 3 sentences. And can I tell this story, Laura? Because
Yeah, please.
this is
This is
Resolve. This
history.
is
Yeah.
3 of us getting a, oh, I know. Somebody on our team who had some PR experience was like, we should do like a press conference in Richmond, which is the state capital of Virginia. We're like, what's a press conference? And they're like, we'll let the media know in the Capitol and you guys show up and talk about this bill. And so we got a woman, a patient who had frozen eggs or frozen embryos. And she was like, I'll drive up to Richmond. I'll be your patient spokesperson. And I was like, okay, we'll go. So the 3 of us from the staff, pile in a car. We drive to Richmond. It's about a 2-hour drive and we don't know our way around. We don't know where to park. We've never been to the state capitol. And we knew there was a room that they said, well, you can have for your press conference. And we're lost. We're literally wandering around. And I see these guys with big, huge cameras with all the TV stations, and they're all walking down this hall, like a ton of them walking down this hallway,
Huh.
walking down this hallway. And it was our room they were walking
Mm.
into. We walk in and it's a small room. Every seat is filled.
Uh-oh.
Cameras all in the back of, now
Oh
granted, it's
my gosh.
local Richmond news, but all the press for the Capitol. And sitting right in the front row is this state senator, big, tall guy, Democrat. And he, like, literally, the podium was like, his face was right on the other side of the podium. And I was like, oh my God, who are these people? What is going on? And I literally went up to one of the cameramen. I go, what, what press conference are you here for? And he goes, oh, for the whole IVF personhood thing. I go, okay, I'm in the right place.
Here we go.
So,
Buckle up.
yeah, so that became our first really big entree. And what was amazing was about a week or so later when they had a public hearing, the way they did the public hearing before this Senate committee is you have like 2 minutes and
Mm-hmm.
they only let like 10 or 15 people go. And all of the national reproductive rights groups were there, Planned Parenthood and NARAL and all the state groups. And they came up to Resolve and they said,
Hmm.
you guys go first and we may not even go. We had patients go first. We had reproductive endocrinologists testify. It was all us.
Wow.
And it was like, oh my God. And the thing got defeated. And it was, oh my God, it was so empowering to recognize that our voice mattered so much. And we were just kind of knocking around, and we still did such an amazing job, and we got our message across, and that really fueled us, and it also kind of solidified us as, hey, these voices of the infertility community matter,
Mm-hmm.
and we need to be at the table because we have a different perspective on this, and it's really important that you hear us. Thank you for listening, by the way, Laura. I have not told that story in such a long time, but I just walking into that room and seeing all of those TV stations, and we were like, what are you here for? Oh, it's for us.
Well, I love listening because this is an incredible part of history. And that is an amazing example of how stories and sharing and not sitting in shame and silence around your infertility or need for IVF. And honestly, so much of what being a part of this community is trying to educate everybody else about what this really means. And I remember sitting in my car in June 2022, and my phone I was getting ready to go to work. I'm on the West Coast. So it was like a little before 8 a.m. And that was like 11 on the East Coast, where the overturn of Dobbs came out, and my phone just started blowing up. I started just bawling. And I've never practiced gynecology or obstetrics or fertility in a time where there was not a federal protection for choice and abortion. And I knew that that was a monumental moment, and that we were going to have to fight for IVF. And it took 2 years to get to the point where IVF was shut down for the exact thing that you're talking about in Alabama, and a state Supreme Court saying that personhood laws meant that the embryos that were accidentally dropped on the floor and were not able to be transferred or turn into a baby, that could be considered killing a person, shut down. It made the providers in all over Alabama say, well, are we going to be persecuted if we
Yep.
freeze embryos, if we do genetic screening on embryos because you have to biopsy an embryo? And so it took 2 years, I think,
Yep.
for the world to wake up
Yeah.
and realize that. But
Right.
you saw that coming. I saw that coming. I mean, that's why
Right.
I helped co-found our nonprofit, Doctors for Fertility, because we needed to have reproductive doctors and voices saying, hey, this is not just about abortion or electively terminating a pregnancy for whatever reason. This is about all of reproductive rights. And part of it is the ability to build families. I really hope you enjoyed this conversation with a true inspirational woman, Barb Collura. She has so much to share. She's done so much for the fertility community, and I was excited to hear more about her personal story. Make sure and come back next week, where we finish this incredible interview and we learn more about exactly what happened in Alabama, exactly what is going on in politics these days, and how you can advocate to protect your reproductive rights. You can find this episode and all others on my website, drlorashahine.com, and also on YouTube. You can find more educational content on Instagram, on TikTok, my YouTube channel. I just love educating. Reach out to us. Send us an email to hello@drlorashahine.com. We want to hear topics that you want to cover, people you'd love us to interview, questions that you have. We really want to hear from you. Thank you to our friends at Seattle Sperm Bank and Braze Runs Production for sponsoring the show. Thank you to my producer, Shannon Perry, and her wonderful team at Audiotocracy. This is your host, Dr. Lora Shahine. See you next week. And until then, wishing you love, luck, and pineapples.